Welcome back to the Traders Network. I'm Michael Yorba, your host. Thanks for joining us. We're also streaming to you live on yorbamedia.com and broadcasting to you from the Dallas KFXR 1190 AM Clear Channel studios. All right, we have got two special guests. Vincent Molinari, he is our crowdfunding and impact investing correspondent from Gate Global Impact, and Vince has brought a special guest with him, Fernando De Sousa. He's a general manager for 4Afrika Initiatives for Microsoft's South African division. All right, welcome to the show, Vincent.
Well, hey, Michael, how are you?
Good, and welcome to the show, Fernando.
Thank you, Michael.
All right, my pleasure. All right, Vincent, since this is your guest, let me back up a little bit if I can, and allow you to introduce Fernando to our audience and take the lead on the conversation so that we can walk through some of the initiatives that Microsoft is doing in South Africa.
Well, great, and let me just frame it for a second to have everybody realize the scope. So, slight correction.
Right.
It is not just South Africa, it is the continent of Africa.
Thank you.
So the size and scope of what Fernando is leading here for Africa really potentially covers the 54 countries that encompass the continent. And again, a little couple of points here that I think we should just point out. Mm-hmm. We're talking about a continent that has nearly a billion and a half people. And we're talking about 20% of the landmass of the globe is the continent. And Fernando, I'm sure, is going to go into some of these finer points, but we're talking about a population where nearly 50% of the people on the continent are 19 years old or younger. So lots happening, very powerful demographic numbers that need to be utilized. But I wanted to take a minute and, of course, welcome Fernando, but tell you a little bit about Fernando's background, because he is truly a global thinker and a great innovator. Mm-hmm. He's established and been a director of Microsoft initiatives that are across 4 continents, including Africa itself, India, the Middle East, China, the United States, Japan, and the United Kingdom. So I get exhausted just thinking about the scope of what Fernando has done in his career. Mm-hmm. He's got great educational experience, including, right here in the U.S. at Cornell University. So truly a global citizen that we have the pleasure of having today with Fernando.
Thank you for making that distinction, because that's very important, and there's no small feat there, Fernando. But obviously, from your background, you're definitely suited for the job. Please, go on.
So I guess I'll toss this over to Fernando, but really he arrived back on the continent in South Africa, and maybe that's where a little of the confusion is coming from, to head up the innovation portion again for 4Afrika, which is Microsoft's initiative for the continent of Africa. And I think it's maybe about your 1-year anniversary of that right now, Fernando. So with that, I'd love to turn it over to you, and if you could tell us a bit about the 4Afrika initiative itself.
Thank you, Vincent. Thank you, both of you, for the generosity of the introduction. So, yes, it's been 22 years of my life almost in Microsoft, working across so many different continents, and I think perhaps emerging markets are possibly the areas, as you said, China, India, Africa, and it's been an incredible journey, which I think started at the time when I came to Microsoft, maybe even before that. But realistically, about 10 years ago, we as a company were really thinking about what was, the legacy, what was the impact, what was it that Microsoft should be doing in a continent like Africa. And so at that time, I was asked, and I had the privilege of actually designing, and I had Bill Gates as my executive sponsor, when we put together our first strategy for Africa. So it was a non-commercial strategy. We aligned ourselves very much with the Millennium Development Goals, and I think this is something that, through the Millennium Development Organization, that all of Africa has been driving and striving towards for many, many years now. The timeline is coming up in 2015 for the MDGs. And so as Microsoft, we sort of thought to ourselves, so how do we contribute to the African continent achieving those Millennium Development Goals? And of course, we focused on areas around, education, around the development of technology, and so on. And we did, and we executed that strategy for a number of years. There was quite a degree of success. I subsequently moved on. I went and ran Microsoft in Saudi Arabia. I was Chief Operating Officer for Middle East and Africa for a period of time, but continued always to be involved in Africa. And a couple of years back, maybe 2.5 years back, it came time to really rethink, and I think this is where the crux of what you refer to, Vince, of the demographics of Africa, because Africa in the last 10 years, even the last 5 years, has changed unbelievably. It's probably the most dramatic change. People tend to be very focused on India and China, Brazil, the BRIC countries, Russia perhaps. But I think we tend to forget the amazing change in Africa. And the first one, as you mentioned, is the population demographics. There's a McKinsey report that came out recently which refers to the growth of the workforce in the world. And Africa, by 2018, will have the world's largest workforce. Just over 500 million people will in Africa be in the workforce. And so these start to become quite staggering statistics. And then the youth of the population that you also referred to. So as Microsoft, again, we looked at how Africa's changing, democracy, social norms. I mean, countries are holding democratic elections. Presidents of countries are actually stepping down. And, perhaps Nelson Mandela was the one that started the process after 5 years of just willfully stepping down. But I think many other countries are doing the same. We still have a lot of challenges, of course, but nevertheless, the change is palpable. But more importantly, and we really listened to the voice of the young people in Africa, and what's coming across loud and clear, and this ties, in fact, Vince, to the work that you do, which is the young people in Africa are saying, we don't want aid, we want trade. We want to develop our own capabilities, and we want to be globally competitive. And all of this data, all of this change led us to get back together again as a team, rethink our strategy in Africa, and design what is now the version of our Africa strategy, which we named Microsoft for Africa. We launched it in February 2013, so you're absolutely correct. We've just clocked our first anniversary, and we're feeling like we can now start to walk. We stopped crawling, and we're now starting to walk. And it feels good. And it feels good because, what Microsoft for Africa represents is, I think, our perspective of, it's about enabling the economic development of Africa. It's about Microsoft participating, not taking the lead, but really, really enabling the population of Africa to drive its global competitiveness, to become that entity which we firmly believe will drive innovation, will drive technology, the knowledge economy in the world. And so our objective and our ambition is to see Africa become a net producer of technology, which today I think very few people would recognize or acknowledge that Africa, could perhaps play a role in that space. And from our perspective, we take all of this and we think, so how do we participate? And so we made the conscious decision to focus on skills, creating world-class skills, focus on innovation of technology, innovation of business models, innovation of, and again, to your work that you do, Vince, but, focus on how do we create an investment climate in Africa, because this is something that will really, really drive the economic development. And finally, and this is a really important concept, and there are many, many organizations thinking about this today, which is affordability of access, affordability of usage, affordability of, just ownership or participation in the revolution that is taking place both in mobile and also across the cloud technology. So in a nutshell, that's where we stand. We've spent the last year really, really testing out a lot of theories, a lot of opportunities, and we're feeling very good about it.
Wonderful.
Well, that's absolutely amazing. Michael, I'm just going to defer to you for a second for a time check since I'm remote here, because there is so much to touch on. So
thank you,
how much
Vince.
do we have before our next segment?
Let's take a break now, but before we do, and then we can come back and talk about the innovation, the skills, the access, and the economic development. But before we go, please, Fernando, give everybody contact information so that they can find your website, know more about this, and then we'll discuss all of these other topics on the other side of this break.
Okay, sure. Easiest. www.microsoft.com/for as the numeric Africa, Afrika, So 4Afrika with a K. That's where you'll find us. That's where all the good stuff is. Lots of videos, lots of information that you can pick up. And Twitter at Microsoft Africa, and Facebook, Microsoft Africa. So you can find us in a bunch of different places.
Thank you, Fernando. All right, Vince and Fernando will come back in just a minute. I want you two to hold on. And let me give a special thanks out to Monk Media and 1-800 Public Relations for all their PR and media support. Ladies and gentlemen, please stick around. This is fascinating stuff. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Traders Network. I'm Michael Yorba, your host. Thanks for joining us. And we are streaming to you live on yorbamedia.com and broadcasting to you from the Dallas KFXR 1190 AM Clear Channel studios. I am joined by Vince Molinari, founder of Gate Global Impact, and Fernando De Sousa. He's the general manager of 4Afrika Initiatives, Microsoft's African initiative. All right, welcome back, gentlemen. Please, if we can pick up where we started or where we left off about the initiatives, the innovation, the skills, the access, and the economic development. I'd really love to hear about that.
Great, Michael, thank you. And I'm going to jump in here because we can have Fernando back for 20 more segments. So this is an advance invitation, Fernando. We need you back quickly because there's so much ground to cover here. I wanted to point out a couple of things where I think it's so important to understand and emphasize what Fernando, 4Afrika, and Microsoft are doing. When we talk about the Millennium Goals, we're talking about the United Nations Millennium Goals. And what Microsoft has been doing as a leader in corporate social responsibility, and year after year coming in at the top of the pack, if not number one like last year, and demonstrating leadership of how to be a good corporate, socially responsible citizen. And what that ties to me for 4Afrika is how they're creating opportunity. This is about sustainability. This is about giving the people of Africa on that continent the ability to be commercially viable and create the opportunity so that they can improve lives, close the digital divide, begin to alleviate poverty, increase education and healthcare. So hats off to you, Fernando, and 4Afrika and Microsoft itself for the amazing leadership and work that you're doing. And with that, I'd love for you to tell us about TV white spaces and broadband access, because I think that is one of the most amazing initiatives that is occurring that you're leading within the continent.
Okay, and so I think to all the issues that you just described, I think it's very clear that access, the ability to participate in the global revolution, in the knowledge economy, is the crux of Africans, or in fact any emerging market or any underserved population in the world, because it's important to understand the context here is that the technology of TV white spaces is not just an African phenomenon, but it's actually something that we've deployed across many countries around the world. We actually ran this technology in the city of Bellevue in Washington State as a way to test the usability of the technology within an urban environment. Across even the United States, there are segments of the population that are not as well served in terms of broadband. So this is important. This is probably the foundation of economic development in the 21st century. And the TV white spaces technology, in really simplistic terms, is the usage of the television, the terrestrial television broadcast spectrum. So we basically allow or enable the sharing of that spectrum. So television continues to broadcast, but we're able to broadcast broadband. And so we do this using the same antennas, the kind of old-fashioned fishbone type of antennas that are used for television. And these, again, are ubiquitous across pretty much every single market, even the poorest markets in the world. There's a television antenna somewhere. We've worked with many different manufacturers and engineers to create the radios and the devices that are actually used. And essentially, we create a broadband distributed network that delivers Wi-Fi pretty much anywhere in the world using the television broadcast spectrum. One of the considerations, of course, was that there probably would be no electricity in the areas where this would be best used. So therefore, we've configured the entire infrastructure to work either with solar or with wind energy sources. So we're also addressing, the clean energy aspect, the renewable, the sustainability of this environment, and making sure that we're actually putting, technology on the ground that enables people to continue to use it. As an example, we started in Kenya for the African context. We went from a very small village up in the northwest of Kenya in the Nanyuki province. We've now grown this to a few 100,000 people that we're starting to cover across Kenya. President Kenyatta, just after his election, visited Nanyuki. This whole initiative has exploded to the point where the president has instructed his government to basically create a full one device for every school child type of scenario, and he believes that the reason why this will now work is because the TV White Spaces technology will bring connectivity to Kenya. He's tasked our partners, because again, Microsoft is doing everything through partnerships on the ground. He's tasked our partners to basically cover 80% of all of Kenya within the next 3 years. The projects have continued. We have a project in Tanzania.
Can I just pause you, and I apologize to interrupt you, but I just want people to really understand the power of what you're saying here. We're talking about using effectively the analog television signal.
That's correct.
Which is cheaper, more access, both for the infrastructure and the distribution, travels further because of the level of the frequency. And you're pioneering that to distribute broadband Wi-Fi connectivity to rural communities around the world that don't even have electric, and now you're pulling in solar panels in a carbon reduction format to power this. So you're creating electrical grid, you're creating Wi-Fi, and now that's going to drive education, knowledge base, healthcare. And what we keep talking about is the commercial viability of the opportunity. That is just amazing. And I'm sorry, please go on. I just wanted to emphasize a bit what was really happening.
No, that's fine, Vincent. I think that this is one of the core principles of our approach to this technology has been, it has to be about an economic model. There has to be an economic self-sustainability to doing this. So not looking for government subsidies to fund the networks. And so part of this has been that we've created a set of entrepreneurs on the ground. So we essentially, we fund and we train and we support and we incubate. So through our Microsoft Ventures Fund for Africa, we are starting to incubate these small business owners who are essentially becoming agents. And what they do is they effectively provide web access, internet access, and power in sort of locations, in small hubs. And so there's also the entrepreneurial and the job creation, because, you know, we need to understand technology, any form of technology, is going to have to enable job creation. This is the number one, concern, and the number one issue across all of Africa is creating jobs. And so we are very, very focused on the economic model that drives this. And I think that is possibly what has caught the attention and the interest of, 20-odd governments in Africa who have all expressed interest. We have 6 governments now, 6 countries where the technology is being deployed. And again, the interesting part of this, Vince, is that what we are finding is, for instance, so Kenya is about government services, small enterprise, schools, clinics. But Tanzania is about universities and university students and campus. Botswana is about remote telemedicine. Namibia is about small entrepreneurs. Morocco has come to the table and said they want to connect all the small businesses. So South Africa, and the pilot is being worked on right now, and they have a different perspective as well. So I think it's one of the most interesting, perhaps again, self-enabling aspects of what we are doing with the TV White Spaces is that countries, governments, communities, citizens of countries are saying, we actually think that the broadband access is most well used in A, B, or C. We want to get all the clinics online. We want to do e-government services. We want to make sure people can vote. There's a democratic process that we want to drive. And I think that is truly empowering to the communities and the population of Africa. And that turns out to be the right model as far as we are concerned.
Wow.
Well, great. I know we're winding down here, and time is flying, Fernando. One quick point, and I see this here. I see the technology being innovated and pioneered in Africa, and you touched on Washington State. This is amazing innovation that this pioneering can now come north out of places where it didn't start before. So that's a complete reversal of the way things had worked.
Yes.
And do you see the opportunity here in the U.S. or North America for the same technology?
We see the opportunity everywhere in the world. In fact, there's many countries: Southeast Asia, Europe, Eastern Europe, North America, South America, Latin America. We actually have initiatives and pilots going across. Africa's the most developed. I think we've got the most focus on Africa, but certainly right across all of the world, India. The technology is actually being evaluated. We have, of course, to work with the regulators in each country, and that requires time.
Gentlemen, we're up against a hard
Are we out of time there, Michael?
Yeah, but please, and I want to second that, Fernando. You are welcome to come back. Vincent, thank you so much. Let me close the segment now. I would appreciate both of you and your time.
Thank you. Happy birthday, Joe Latona.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Vincent Molinari, founder Gate Global Impact, and Fernando De Sousa, General Manager for Africa Initiatives. Good luck, good trading, and a special thanks to Monk Media and 1-800 Public Relations for all their PR and media support.